Hi, I'm Heather from here booktubes, and today is a standalone video review rave about The Queen of Attolia, which is the second in the Queen's Thief series by Megan Whalen Turner. This is a many times reread for me. This is my favorite book series, so the first part will be spoiler free as much as I can for a second book, and then a section where I will use the highlights of this to talk about this book specifically, so that's a little bit different from the first video, and then finally a spoilers for this series section. The first book is about a thief on a journey, and we follow him as he tries to steal an impossible thing, and then a lot happens at the end of the book that is spoilers and twists and turns, and I can't really tell you about. In this book, we follow the thief again. Right at the beginning, we are following him in a lot of action. A lot is happening right at the beginning of the book, and then the events of the start of the book spiral out of control basically, and we watch a war happen between the three countries that are on this peninsula. And then again at the end of the book, we have a lot happening, a lot going on, a lot of twists and turns, but really this is a story about trying to prevent an empire from taking over their countries while at the same time those countries are at war with each other, which is always the best time to try and take them over. This is really the book where our main character, Jen, goes from being a boy, a teenager, to a man. He grows up rapidly in this book. He's around 18, 19, 20, somewhere in there. We don't ever get his specific ages in the book, but he is right there. He goes from being a young adult basically to an adult. And some of that is through the passage of time, and some of that is through the events of this book maturing him. There's also a hate to love romance in this book, and it is true hate to love. There's a lot going on there. We just watch these countries fight each other and fight this empire and see who comes out on top and how they can possibly come out of this in one piece. This book also follows a enemy queen who is harassed and surrounded on all sides by people she can't trust, by people who would much prefer to serve whatever man she marries. She is dealing with all sorts of political insubordination in her own country, as well as being at war. And she has clawed her way to the top. She's clawed her way to queen. She has held on to power and has struggled to hold on to her power for no reason other than the fact that she is a woman who is ruling misogynistic men. So that's it. That's really the setup for this book. It takes us from just following one character, one group of characters, to truly actually following these countries and their future and survival. So here's the spoiler section for The Queen of Attolia, one of my all-time favorite books. I was dreading rereading this because of the events at the beginning of the book, so obviously spoilers are here. Okay, so the gag of this book, I think, is something that you don't really realize so much the first time that you read it, and I think that there is an argument to be made either way here, but Attolia, the Queen of Attolia, is the main character of this book, even though you don't have her perspective very much, even though you only really have her perspective here and there, and at the end you have so much from Jen. You see her through his eyes in a lot of different ways, in the eyes of Edis and just, you know, her enemies in a lot of ways. But Attolia is the main character, and if she was the main character, she would get so much more hype because she's exactly the type of main character that we love, right? She's a woman who is smarter than everyone else, more ruthless than everyone else. She's the most strategic person at her court. She is able to outsmart and outwit the people who are constantly trying to get her to be married off. And she has been doing this since she was a young princess, right? Her country was unstable even before she took the crown. Her father was assassinated. Her brothers were assassinated. She became the crown princess because of the instability of her court. On top of that, then she had her fiance and his father, who was planning on taking over the country through Attolia, and how she poisoned him on their wedding night, how she took control in such a brilliant manner, in a way that she was our main character and we're following her starting when she was a minor princess. Unbelievable. But she's just as great in this. It's just told in a different way, right? But she's the main character that everyone likes. She's exactly the type of main character that everyone likes, except that we are introduced to her not only as the enemy, but also as someone who has grievously harmed our character, our favorite, Jen. It is not an easy thing to read his hand getting chopped off. It's not easy to read any of those things. I think it's even more difficult when you read it through the lens of having finished the book and knowing that Eugenides is in love with her. He is in love with her before she chops off his hand. All of the little things, all the gifts, all the hints that he was there, all of the notes beside her breakfast that have irritated her so much and have made her fear him in so many ways, because he is a very lethal political tool. He is the thing that's stopping Sunis from messing with Eddis. He is a threat to anyone he chooses to be, but Attolia does not realize that he does not choose to be a threat to her because he loves her. So all these things that he's done because he simply can't resist her have actually stoked the fires and have made her so not only irritated with him, but also fearful of him, because he's constantly in her palace and he is an enemy. So when you go to that scene and he is begging her to not cut off his hand and he's begging her to let him be her thief after he already turned her down, right, all those years ago, and she says that she could not trust him, and he has to live with that reality, that he was born the thief of Eddis and she was born the Queen of Attolia, you know, and that is just so sad. It's so sad seeing that, knowing how much he loves her. When you see that Eddis is talking about getting rid of Attolia and deposing her, and he immediately basically starts working on an alternative plan as soon as he finds that out, because Eddis doesn't know either how much he loves Attolia. After he gets his hand cut off and he is so obviously struggling to adapt to his new reality, justifiably so, but he's in a depression, he's having such a difficult time, he's so angry that he is useless because he only has one hand, and he, you know, is mad at Eddis and says, "What use do you have for a useless one-handed thief?" And she just asks him not to be useless. She said, "All of the things that you have done have been impossible for other men with two hands. What was just as impossible with two hands is no more impossible for you with your one hand. And I need you to steal peace for me. Do something about this war. Don't just sit here and mope." And the gods tell him to stop whining, and the magus, you know, comes to visit, and that is a strategic error on his part. He awakens Jen, he awakens the beast that is Eugenides, telling him about the war, and also just, you know, saying, hey, you know, you can still do something. Get your queen to surrender. Everyone is grieving for Jen, even though he's still alive, including his cousins that were constantly, you know, doing real harm to him the same way that he did harm to them. They're the first ones to get in line and literally go and die for the thief. You really see that losing his hand is something that takes Eugenides from a child, from a young adult, to a man. He is no longer the person that he was before. He has a bit of a personality change, not extremely, because he's going to still put on a lot of the same shenanigans in the future, but you are dealing with a much more hardened, ruthless, who is willing to go to extremes that he was never willing to go to before. The loss of Eugenides politically has been huge, right? The loss of the thief is a big deal for Eddis. This is something that has played, and we see, I think, for the first time just how big politically the role of the thief is, how much that mattered in their peace with the other countries. And we see him, once he comes out of his depression, using his isolation as a tool to lower everyone else's guard. And he uses that to help him steal the Magus and to destroy Sunis's navy, which is just brilliant. And this is once again something that was referenced in the first book, that Jen fundamentally understands that if you choose to sacrifice another country to stop the Medes, that country is not going to appreciate it. They don't want to be overrun, they don't want to be used. And so he, partially because of his love for Attolia, but I think just because of his understanding of the world, he does not view Sunis or Attolia as a sacrificial piece in keeping the Medes away from Eddis. He absolutely believes in keeping all three countries safe. And uniting them against the Medes. Attolia is truly one of my all-time favorite characters. She has been so lonely and so alone for so long. She is constantly on a knife's edge. She is balancing, she's placating this baron and taking care of this ambassador and making this person happy, and above all of that, keeping her power, right? She is not letting any of them run the show, but she has to work with them. That is the way that her kingdom works, and she's so brilliant politically, but she has had to be ruthless, and that has not been as easy for her as her enemies and her loyal servants alike think that it is. And Jen has a unique ability. You see this with Eddis and you see this with Attolia. He has a unique ability to view royalty as humans, right? He doesn't really care that you're the Queen of Eddis. You're still the same cousin that he always had. The same thing for Attolia. He has watched her for so long, and he is able to see beyond her mask. He's able to see all of the many layers of protection that she has put up to be able to survive in the court that she was born into. And he sees her. He sees how hard it is for her, how alone she is, and he is so determined to join her, to be there for her, to give her comfort and someone to rely on. All throughout this book, we watch Attolia do the most that she can with what little she has, and she is constantly finding new ways to get it. And she does not want a treaty with the Medes, but she is flattering their ambassador and doing whatever she can to get the gold that she needs from him without actually committing herself to anything. He thinks that she is so beautiful, but a piece of fluff, right? He does not take her seriously as a threat because she is a woman. Obviously, she does play very much into that prejudice and does let him see exactly what he's expecting to see. She takes his advice, leading him to think that she relies on the advice of everyone else and that she's not the true brilliance behind the throne. I'm with Jen. I hate that Mede so much. The way he talks to her is infuriating, but it is so fascinating to watch her handle him right from the very beginning when Jen is captured all the way to the very end. And that final reveal when she gets to tell him how the coup that she has pulled off and how she has manipulated him every step of the way is so satisfying. I love it so much. Yeah, I just love her. I love her. And I find it interesting that she did pull off the coup with Mede, because the entire reason why Eugenides' plan failed was because of the gods, right? Obviously the gods orchestrating it, because his ultimate goal and their ultimate goal was for Attolia to love him. And if his kidnapping, if all of that plan had gone off flawlessly, yes, they still would have driven the Mede away. Yes, they still would have been married, but Attolia would not have loved him or trusted him the way she did when she had to choose him for herself, when she had to choose to ally herself with him, and wear the earrings. Up until that final bit, we are watching Attolia having fewer and fewer options, and something that I find so frustrating and so, like, you know, it kind of hurts my heart a little bit with this, is Attolia is backed into a corner, right? She is fighting for her life in so many different ways, but because she doesn't have the support that she needs, on top of that, Eddis views her as an unstable threat and is looking to depose her when Eddis could be her ally. Instead, because she has it so difficult, Eddis is like, actually, we can't use you. And obviously that's not a conversation that they have, but that's just the events of the book, and that's so sad to me. I also think that is so interesting how Attolia was jealous of Eddis her whole life. Attolia is gorgeous, right? And Eddis is not. But Eddis was happy. Even after she became queen, she was happy and safe. She didn't need the advice that Attolia gave her. She was able to completely ignore it and be safer in Attolia's palace than Attolia was, and it was her home. Another moment that is so, like, heart-wrenching to me is when Attolia thinks that Jen has been poisoned, that the bridegroom that she chose has been poisoned by Nahusharush, and that all of her options are gone. Everything that she thought that she had just accomplished has been ripped out from under her. She's going to be at war with no allies, and also not with the man that she has foolishly fallen in love with despite her best attempts not to. And when he's just sleeping and her relief to have him in her life, so sweet. Then right after that is the first time Jen really thinks about the fact that he is going to be the King of Attolia, that he's going to have to be the King of Attolia, that all of the things that he has mocked Edis for, being the dancing bear of her court and having to do, you know, meetings and things all day long and be dressed up in ridiculous outfits that don't suit her, he's just signed himself up for all of that. And yet it is worth it because he's going to be married to Attolia. As someone who thinks that like fame and royalty especially is so often a trap, like it's a trap that you can't get out of, that's the way I've always viewed it, I do find it incredibly sweet that he views it the same way and is willing to step into the cage and lock the door because she's in there and he is going to be with her. He's not going to leave her alone in there. And you know, I like that Attolia is angry with his gods on his behalf. I like that that is something that happens in the end of this book, and that she also gets over it in this book, and that is, you know, a whole thing that is started and resolved here. The gods betrayed him, but did they give their favorite exactly what he wanted? And this is Edis being told that Jen has been captured by Attolia. They said she's going to make him pay for taunting her, leaving things in the palace so she knows he's been there. And then Edis says, I was wrong to send him. It was as much concession as she can make to the horror she felt at her mistake. Eugenides had hinted that the risks would be greater if he returned to Attolia so soon after his last visit. She hadn't listened. She needed the information only he could get, and the thief had so easily outwitted his opponents in the past. Edis had assumed he would do so again. She had sent him, and he hadn't hesitated to go. She turned to her minister of war. It was his son who would die for her error in judgment. I'm sorry, she said. She won't take a ransom. And this is talking about his cousins beating him, and this is important for the next book, right? She never worried about his complaints. She worried only when he was quiet. Either he was plotting something so outrageous it would bring her entire court to her throne howling for his blood, or he'd been fighting with his father, or on very rare occasions it meant he'd been seriously hurt. When hurt, he'd been white-faced and quiet, staying in his rooms until he'd started to heal, and then when he was feeling better, he complained constantly. Eugenides is talking to Edis about having his hand cut off, and he says she was within her rights, and Edis says she was not. It was a common punishment for thieves. Don't be stupid, snapped Edis. They haven't cut the hand off a thief in Attolia in 100 years. And anyway, you're not a common thief. You are my thief. You are a member of the royal family. She attacked all of Edis through you, and you know it. Edis had no business in her palace, Eugenides was whispering. Attolia has no business treating with the Medes, she said. I didn't come to Sunis to blow up his majesty's warships. I came to steal his magus. You can't, said the magus in question. I can steal anything, even with one hand. Edis says she's thinking of murdering the Queen of Attolia, and Eugenides says, I hate that Mede. In Edis, they appreciate the fact that Attolia is the mastermind and that Attolia is a political force to be reckoned with. She's an astute strategist. The Queen of Edis is forced to defend Attolia and says, she's vicious, she's barbaric, and I think by this time edging toward insane, but I'm forcing myself to be honest. She has not indulged in atrocities for personal pleasure or for personal revenge. She has used them as deterrents to defend her throne. The thief speaks at the Council of War and says, our goal has been to dethrone Attolia without inviting in the Mede. If the instability of her rule were eliminated and Attolia had a government more stable but inimical to the Mede, it could mean an alliance between Edis and Attolia that would drive back Sunis. I think, Eugenides said quietly, that I could eliminate the instability of the Attolian queen. All right, she said at last, go and steal the Queen of Attolia. So this is the Queen of Attolia and her old attendant, Frazine, is combing out her hair and she teases her. You will wear yourself to the bone, your beauty will be gone, and your suitors will lose interest. It's a mask, Frazine. The suitors haven't any interest in me, only to be replaced with another. And that one? Power, what men like best for themselves and least in their women. That is my favorite quote of the entire series. That she will be queen, and she will only have a king when she chooses one. They hadn't called for the Shadow Queen then. Over the previous years, she learned all she needed to know about her father's most powerful barons, and while they squabbled about who might be the next king, she'd made herself queen. I love Attolia. I know that you hate her at the beginning because of the hand thing, but I love Attolia. You've changed, said Attolia, so I have been told. Into the boat, your majesty. So he tells her that he's going to drown her, conscious or unconscious, or you can offer me something I want more than I want to hold your head underwater until the last of your heir is gone. I want to be king of Attolia. I wasn't proposing to become your heir, said the thief. Then what? Asked Attolia. There's an easier way for a man to become king, said Eugenides, and waited for her to realize what he proposed. He had read carefully, trying to see whether Attolia could be the monster in human guise she was accused of being, or only a woman who ruled without the support of her barons. In the end, he had taken advice his grandfather had given him years before and gone to see for himself. He has Attolia, she's promised to marry him, they have made it, and then they are under attack. Eugenides comes in her tent with a sword. What luck you have, he said, stepping toward her. She wouldn't cower. She lifted her chin as he crossed the tent toward her. When he reached her side, he did not raise the sword as she had expected. He bent down and kissed her briefly on the lips. I love them. For the longest time, this was just my favorite romance. It's just little hints and little tiny bits, but I love it so much. So he is so afraid of the torture that she's going to do before he's dead, but worse than dying was knowing that she would be the one to take those things from him because she hated him. The thief leaned closer to the queen to speak almost into her ear. From shadow queen to puppet queen in one rule, he whispered. That's very impressive. When he rules your country and he tells you he loves you, I hope you believe him. So while the Mede has taken over everything, Attolia has to pretend to be happy with him. And then she sends the Minister of War as her messenger back to Edis. Tell your queen that I will not return her thief a second time. What remains of his life he spends with me. Do you understand, messenger? I believe so, your majesty. Edis sent her thief to steal me from my throne and bring me back as her puppet. I think Edis does not understand my attachment to my allies, the Medes. When he thought I was safely distant from any rescue, her thief proposed life or death to me and let me choose my fate. I'm in my own Megaron and have an answer to the thief's proposal. Do you know what my answer is? Yes, the prisoner said. Yes, the queen repeated after him, enunciating the word clearly. You may tell the Queen of Edis. So all of this is right in front of the Mede, where he doesn't know what she's saying, that she accepts Edis's terms and accepts the thief's terms. So the Mede ambassador is taken under guard and he gains control of his temper and says, you are clever, he condescended to say, to have made a fool of me. How heartbreaking to leave just as I begin to know you. My opinion of you climbs with each passing moment. You don't understand your weakness if you think the greater nations will protect you. We will see how much longer you rule your backwater, your majesty. You will soon enough discover the limits of your resources. Will I? I think you underestimate me still, Nahusharesh. While we are being forthright with each other, I admit that I find it tedious. Attolia tells Edis that she's fortunate in her vassals and that she just has contract soldiers. And Edis says, so much the better that you command their loyalty when they are free to hire their services elsewhere. Where else could my barons go and still be barons? Edis tells Attolia that she thought that she was fond of the Mede ambassador. And she says, so did he. Nahusharesh has said a woman cannot rule alone, Attolia said blandly. Edis chuckled. Attolia is back in the palace. The familiar tensions return as she immersed herself once again in the struggle to exert her will in a world conventionally run by men, where she had to be not stronger but more powerful than her opponents. Eugenides tells her, "What snakes and weasels fill your court, your majesty." That is a challenge, and also that he cannot bear to leave her alone, surrounded by stone walls. She's too precious to give up. Oedipus is talking to Attolia, and she convinces her that if she marries Eugenides, she can only marry him if she decides to believe that he loves her. She doesn't have to marry him, but if she does, she has to believe him. Attolia is so afraid of Eugenides lying to her and of believing him and being wrong that she refuses to give him a chance. He has not offended the gods, and they tell him that the price for everything that he wanted was his hand. What would he give up if he could get his hand back? Would he give up his eyes? Would he give up his tongue? Would he allow the Medes to take over the continent? Would he allow Oedipus and Sunis and Attolia to be overrun? Would he watch Attolia be killed, or Attolia be forced into a marriage with the Mede? Would he rather have those things, or would he rather have his hand? And if the gods had given him the choice, he would have paid the price of his hand for exactly what they gave him. There is something so beautiful and so appealing to me about a woman in power who is alone, who is unsupported, who needs allies, and who gets a love, who doesn't undermine her, who doesn't make life more difficult for her, who is a safe place, a place of strength that she can lean on and that will help her and that will improve her life in every single way. And that is my favorite part about this, because Jen doesn't want to be king. He never wanted to be king. He only wants to be married to the queen. And the only way he can do that is to become the king. But it's her that he wants. It is not in any way, shape, or form her throne or her kingdom, because for him, that's a negative. This is such interesting enemies to lovers to me, because I think without the gods and without that being the price basically for these events to unfold and for the gods to have the knowledge of that it's a pretty hard sell to have an enemies to lovers where she cut off his hand. But the way that is wrapped up and presented, and the way that she didn't love him then, and the way that she has always just done what she had to do and not taken pleasure from it, just been the most ruthless because that is the only way for her continued survival, that works for me. I appreciate that. That's it for spoilers for this book. The next part is spoilers for the series. It's sad in a lot of ways how often Oedipus and Eugenides say "my thief" and "my queen" in this book, because after this book, he's no longer her thief. This is the last book that we see him having that relationship with her. After this whole thing, he's the king of Attolia, and he's the thief of Attolia, and he is no longer the queen's thief of Oedipus. And it's such a huge part of this book, and it's really bittersweet when you're rereading it and knowing that this is the end of that affection and that closeness will never be quite the same again, despite never going away either. Something that I love about having the knowledge of the rest of the series in this book is that when the Mede ambassador, when the Ahasuerus, when he interferes and keeps the Queen of Attolia from giving the thief of Oedipus an easy death, he signed his death warrant. He does not realize that Eugenides is such a formidable opponent, that Eugenides is going to hate him with the burning passion of 1,000 fiery suns, and that he is going to spend the rest of Ahasuerus's life dismantling his life piece by piece and hunting him to the furthest corners of the world until he kills him, until he destroys everything that he has ever wanted or ever cared about. He does not realize the calamity, the depths of his mistake in making the thief his enemy. And I hate the Mede. I hate the Mede so much, so I love watching his life be ruined. We meet Kemet the slave, and obviously he comes into play later. We also meet Teleus, the captain of the Queen of Attolia's guard. I like him so much. I can't wait to read him again in the next book. So much of the future of the series is presented in this book, and you just don't quite realize it the first time that you're reading it. I love that the end of this book is them believing that they love each other and showing that love and having that base for the next book where we have an entirely different perspective, and maybe don't realize quite how close they are. I just love this series. The next book is my very favorite, and I can't wait to jump into it. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.